Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I would like to especially thank our panelists for participating in tonight's event. We are here tonight to celebrate a groundbreaking film called Changing the Game, as we call for greater attention to the terrible slate of legislative attacks against transgender student athletes across this nation. Despite the fact that the majority of people in the United States support non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people and oppose anti-transgender bills, including the majority of Republicans. Today, hundreds of bills have been introduced in state legislatures around the country that attempt to erase transgender people and make LGBTQ people second-class citizens. What many people may not realize is that the number of bills we are seeing, particularly bills targeting transgender young people, is unprecedented. 2021 is on track to become the worst year for state legislative attacks against LGBTQ people in history. 11 anti-LGBTQ bills have already been enacted into law, and another 9 bills are already on the desks of governors awaiting action. In Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, and South Dakota, there are now overtly discriminatory laws, and in the case of South Dakota, executive orders banning transgender athletes from participating in sports. All of these bills are dangerous and harmful to LGBTQ people, particularly trans and non-binary youth. The fact of the matter is these bills are not rooted in the real world. They're rooted in fear, discrimination, and disinformation. Supported by anti-LGBTQ extremist organizations like the ADF. These bills are the latest in a long line of attacks on LGBTQ people, and nothing more than an attempt to score political points by harming and discriminating against already marginalized people. We have seen this playbook before in the bathroom bills, in efforts to thwart marriage equality, and in initiatives to prohibit LGBTQ people from working in public schools. These bills are also deeply rooted in racism as well as sexism. The images that proponents of these bills most often use are of Black trans women and girls. They attempt to dehumanize the stories of young women like Andrea and Terry, who you saw in the film. This is sadly not new. Black girls and women have their bodies constantly policed in athletics and beyond. These bills are just another hateful take. And as doctors across the country have noted from their own statements and their own experiences, if these bills are passed, children will be deeply impacted. Already families having to relocate to pick up and move in order to protect their kids and their families' futures. It is also important to say here, political rhetoric doesn't stop in the State House. It also fuels stigma and violence. These bills are already being advanced even as we experience a wave of anti-trans violence devastating our community. So far in 2021, we are on track to more than double the number of trans and gender non-conforming people killed in 2020, which was already the deadliest year on record. This is a national crisis that merits national attention and united action. The Human Rights Campaign is sounding the alarm alongside our partners like Athlete Ally and incredible advocates on the ground. Just this week, the Human Rights Campaign sent a follow-up letter to the NCAA to take urgent, meaningful action, such as withdrawing championship events from states enacting anti-LGBTQ legislation. We have also been calling on corporate leaders, elected officials, and our entire nation to speak out and make their voices heard. And all that we do, we have the privilege of working alongside incredible young athletes and advocates on the front lines of this fight. Athletes like Mac, Sarah Rose, and Andrea, who are the subjects of this film. We are honored tonight to have one of those athletes, Sarah Rose. I hope that after watching Changing the Game, you were as inspired as I was by the determination, advocacy, and grace these athletes reflect. And I hope you were as disturbed as I was by the hateful, painful obstacles that are put in their paths. These athletes and trans and non-binary athletes across this country shouldn't have to fight to compete. Our young people should be able to focus on excelling on and off the field, but instead, they are having to defend their very right to exist. Those who oppose our progress want to deny our humanity, but they're on the losing side of history. Trans and non-binary people are not going anywhere. Instead, we are tearing away the barriers of the past, and they are building a brighter future for all of us. And now I have the pleasure of introducing someone who is working to help build that brighter future for all of us. Our moderator for tonight's event, Jay Brown, who is the Senior Vice President of Programs, Research, and Training for the Human Rights Campaign.
Thank you so much, Alfonso. You heard Alfonso share about the battles that we're facing in state legislatures all across the country. As a trans man and an advocate, I firmly believe that sharing our stories is one of the essential keys to changing hearts and minds and securing our rights. But the reality is it's not easy to do that. It can be scary, it can be lonely, and often unsafe. It means taking real risks. The young people in this film are nothing short of heroes. And the filmmakers who brought their stories to life have my and others' enormous gratitude. I'm thrilled to be here tonight to talk to a few of these folks and other incredible advocates who are working to change the game for the better. So without further ado, let me welcome first Alex Schmitter. Alex uses he, him pronouns, and he's the producer of Changing the Game and an associate director of trans representation at GLAAD. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks so much for having me.
Next up is Ann Lieberman. Ann uses they, them pronouns, and they're the director of policy and programs at Athlete Ally. Thanks so much for being here, Ann.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone.
Next up is Lucina Fisher, who uses she, her pronouns and is a member of the Human Rights Campaign's Parents for Trans Equality Council. Lucina, it's always good to see you.
And you, Jay. Hi, everybody.
And finally, the star of tonight, Sarah Rose Huckman, who uses she, her pronouns. You'll recognize Sarah from the film. She has been on the front lines fighting for trans rights in her home state of New Hampshire since she was a young teenager, and she's a lifelong athlete. Sarah, we're so incredibly happy you could join us tonight, and I'm appreciative of you being here.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for having me. Hi, everybody.
Folks, let's get right into it. So Changing the Game is such a powerful film because it centers the stories and lives of trans youth in ways we typically don't get to see or hear. Anne, can you start with sharing a little bit more about the film and why the conversation is so pressing right now?
Absolutely, and thank you for that question, Jay. So we at Athlete Ally have had the opportunity to work with Alex and work on Changing the Game for about 2 years now, which sounds crazy to say out loud. And we were all actually talking a little bit in the green room before about how many multiple boxes of tissues we all need or needed to watch the film. And so, you know, the first time I saw the film, I just cried my eyes out. And I also knew that it would have such a unique ability to change hearts and minds in a way that little else does in the broader conversation about trans inclusion in sport. And that's because it humanizes each of these incredible athletes and their families. And it also shows the complexity and richness of their lives. It's not a one-note narrative, which I think is really important when we're talking about changing hearts and minds. You know, it also shows us a really significant journey narrative with these athletes and also their families and their support systems in 3 very unique contexts in this country. And this film really speaks to what we've been trying to underscore at Athlete Ally for the past decade, which is that this is not a partisan issue. This is about real people. It is about real families and real kids who want to play sports that they love and want to play sports with their friends. I think Alfonso gave a really great overview of the current landscape, and I just want to underscore that this is the worst legislative session in history for LGBTQ plus folks. And we have over half of the country trying to ban trans kids from playing sports with their friends. And that's not even mentioning the medical care bans, which we won't have a chance to get into tonight. But this is a full out assault and attack on trans kids, on trans people. And we are seeing just another way in which trans people, non-binary folks, intersex folks are being used as a wedge issue. And so again, to bring it back to the film is so compelling because it allows people to see the faces, the families, the stories behind the numbers of bills and these conversations we have at a more abstract level.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Anna. And just to underscore, especially if you're in Arkansas, Florida, Montana, there are bills pending the governor's signature in those states right now. And in many more states, this is coming up. So if you have not yet reached out to your lawmakers, please do. Thank you so much, Anne. Alex, you and I have talked about in making the film, you said there's been a lot of growth, personal growth that you've had. Can you talk more about what that was like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working at GLAAD for about 4.5 years off and on. This film really started about 4 years ago. And my work at GLAAD is really to do a survey of the media landscape and hold the media to account to tell better, more authentic and accurate stories about the trans community. And so when director Michael Barnett reached out to me, he was compelled to do so because someone young in his life shared that they had a transgender child. And even as the open-minded, progressive man that he knows himself to be, he quickly realized he didn't have the tools to be an ally for this child that would be in his life for the rest of his life. And so as a filmmaker, he just went out and looked for stories about trans people. And he came across Mac Begg's story at the time. And also at that time, Andrea Yearwood's story was starting to pop up in the news media. And it was interesting to him. I mean, sports is something that is so universal in all of our lives in some way or another. We either have participated or we went to a school that has sports, or all these different ways that we're connected to sport based on our geographics, our schools, our communities. And he reached out to me at GLAAD for help to understand, was there a place for this story? Was he the one to tell it? And I had my own discomforts about this. As a trans person, I had only consumed the media that had been fed me, which was that there are all these very specific narratives about who trans people are, specifically in athletics. There's one singular narrative that's always sort of at the forefront. And I really had to dig into my own discomfort around why I felt the way I did about trans inclusion in sports as we were producing this film. And so I come from a place of what this film ultimately became and is a love letter to all trans youth and their families, that they can be the heroes in their own stories, and that we all have to do the work inside ourselves to navigate through that discomfort and ask ourselves the difficult questions about why we feel the ways that we do. And as Alfonso so brilliantly put, so much of it is rooted in racism and sexism, and also understanding what stories and whose stories get told and how. And ultimately, what changing the game is giving back these young people their stories, which are so often taken from them and used to exploit and exclude them. And so I've gone on my own journey, and my hope is that everyone will watch the film and go on theirs as well.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that. Sarah, so speaking of journeys, what was the journey like for you in making this film, and how has your life, if at all, but how has your life changed? I know, this is going to be premiering on Hulu on June 1st, so you might be bracing for another set of changes once it gets a larger audience. So, but tell us a little bit more about what this has been like.
Yeah, thank you. This journey has been a whirlwind of emotions and just brand new opportunities, I guess, from the very beginning. When I believe it was Claire Tucker who reached out to me, I was, of course, very wary of like how this was going to work out, what this is going to entail, who's telling my story, because like it's my narrative, and I'm very I hold that very dear to myself. That it's my life. And so after talking to Claire and then finally meeting with Michael Barnett, I came to a conclusion with my parents that this was definitely something that I wanted to partake in. And so we did, and it just took off from there. Filming started in high school. A bunch of my teammates were like really excited to see where this was going to go, and hope that they were like, oh my gosh, are we going to be able to be in it? And I was like, of course, as long as like you have like consent and stuff like that. And so it just took off from there. And then I don't know, going to all these film festivals was a first for me. Traveling was a first for me because I'd never really traveled outside of my little bubble in New Hampshire. And yeah, and here we are now. It's just been amazing. And I'm so glad that I was able to share my story with so many people.
Me too. I think all of us are. So thank you so much for sharing, man. I want to stay with you just for a minute. What often gets overlooked is that people participate in sports for a number of positive reasons. What originally drew you to participate in sports, and what did you learn about yourself through being an athlete?
Yeah. So evidently when I really started to do sports and started to see that I was like, I guess an athlete, it was really, I guess like the team feeling and the family feeling of all my teams that I was on. Like the instant I stepped onto like the team bus or something or into the team room, I was just welcomed by like so many people and just loved for who I am. I of course love running cross country, running track, Nordic skiing. I love doing all of those things, but I think in the end, it was really just like the team spirit and the family feeling of everybody being loving and kind.
That's great. Lucina, it's great to see you again tonight. You're part of our Parents for Trans Equality Council at HRC. As a parent, what lessons do you hope your kids have learned from playing sports? I know you have several, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
I do. I have 3 children, and I've always told them since they were very young, there are 3 things I want them to do in school, and that's learn to play an instrument, learn to speak a second language, and play a sport. And my kids have played sports since they were very little. And that includes my daughter, Gia, who transitioned when she was 12 years old. She was the first in her middle school to do so. And prior to her transition, Gia had been running cross country. She'd done it for 4 years. And she hesitated after she transitioned to go back to her team. But because she was the first in her school to transition, we ended up sending a letter to the entire middle school. And we heard right away from her peers, from their parents, just love and support from the very beginning. And her coach actually reached out to us the same day, and he said to us that he was wondering if Gia was coming back, and he wasn't only wondering. Her teammates were asking for her. All the girls were wondering, "Are you coming back, Gia?" And when I told her that, she said, "You know, maybe I should." And so she went in the next day, and everybody just embraced her with a huge hug. And then they went on and practiced. And that was the end of that. And she became the captain of the girls' team that year. She had a great time. It was a wonderful experience. And then when she went up to high school, the only difference was that the track and cross country coach were trying to get her to get on the team, and she was more interested in field hockey. So she did field hockey for 4 years, had a ball, was part of, as Sarah Rose says, a family. She really got such a great community from being a part of that team. And it was just wonderful to watch her thrive and enjoy what she was doing.
And I just want to chime in and say to what Lucina so beautifully put and what Sarah Rose was speaking about as well. so many of the media narratives are about not having acceptance, and yet the vast majority of trans youth who are participating in sports receive so much support and welcoming and inclusion, and there's this sense of camaraderie. I mean, really what it comes down to, what are sports really about, especially when you're growing up? I mean, it's about learning how to win and learning how to lose. It's about getting up and practicing. It's about committing your time, because when you're playing a sport, you need to figure out when to do your homework. Like, it is about so many different things. And part of that is finding community and also finding a part of your identity. I mean, being an athlete is a form of identity for so many of us. I mean, it's something like 80% or 90% of youth participate in youth sports. And so, you know, I think often what gets lost is the value of sport, not only in physical health, but mental health, social health, these things that make us better people, because we learn how to be teammates. We learn how to support other people and let them shine when they're doing the assist and someone's doing the dunk, or whatever sports metaphor we want to use. But I just wanted to add, those stories are not the uncommon ones. And we need to hear more about them.
Yeah, I think that goes a lot to the earlier points. It's not always safe and easy to tell those stories. So it's really, you know, again, huge kudos to you, Sarah, for being out there and doing that. Our own research, I think, has shown that there's hundreds of thousands of kids who are trans who are participating in sports. And those stories, I agree 100% need to be told, and that's what's happening here. Alex, just to stay with you for a minute more, in your experience with the film, what have you found to be the most effective thing in educating people about this issue of inclusion in sport, and how do you see this issue affecting more than just trans athletes?
So we've been touring the country and the world, honestly, with Changing the Game for the past 2 years. We premiered it at Tribeca Film Festival, and then we've shown it across, again, the country and world. And no matter where we have gone, to my, I hate to say surprise, no matter what color the state was, whether it was a city or a town, no matter what the demographics, when people sit down and get to know Sarah, and they get to know Mac, and they get to know Andrea and Terry and their families, the overwhelming reaction is them taking a moment and taking a step back and understanding that these are just kids trying to be kids and live their life and participate and be included. And I think so much often gets into policy and legislative conversations, which we have to have. But if we're not also talking about the people who are affected by these policies and actually getting to know them and hear from them, it's abstract. And so we have found, to our surprise, and delight is not the word. I don't have the words really. We've been overwhelmed with the response, in that once you get to know these kids, once you get to know trans people in your life, and not just the media's projections historically of who we are, which have for the most part been very gross misrepresentations and mischaracterizations of who we are, most people can see our humanity. They can see our full lives. They can see that we are so much more than our gender identities. And so that's what we found. And that's why we will be taking this film and sharing it with whoever wants to watch a sports film, because we also shot it like a Nike ad. So, but I want Anne to also weigh in, because Anne has been on this journey with us the entire time, and I think can speak to how this is not just about trans kids.
Yeah, you know, I think there are a few really important things to highlight here. The first piece is the hyper focus on trans athletes, and specifically trans women and girls in sport, is not allowing us to actually address the very real and documented threats to women's sports, threats that have been and challenges to women's sports that have been very well documented by amazing organizations like the Women's Sports Foundation, like the Tucker Center. And these are challenges like uneven implementation of Title IX, lack of resources for women and girls athletic programs in schools across the country. There are so many things that we really can do to address inequities in women's sport. And yet there is a focus on trans kids and their ability to play sports with their friends, despite the fact that there is no empirical evidence to suggest that trans kids, trans women and girls have ever or will ever dominate sports. And so I think it's really important for us to understand how that weighs on our ability to actually support women's sports overall. And then the second piece is when we look at this legislation across the country, it absolutely impacts cis women who might not conform to a very specific kind of white femininity. So a lot of these bills allow gender to be questioned on women's teams if somebody does not believe a particular athlete to be a real woman. And as Alfonso mentioned at the top, this disproportionately affects young Black and brown women. And so we also need to understand the deep history of the way in which transphobia is inextricably linked to white supremacy and structural racism. So this really, there's a focus on trans athletes, but it really impacts all of our families, all of our kids in this greater conversation.
I really appreciate that, Anne. Thank you. Sticking on the legislation piece, we've seen more and more states, as we said, trying to pass these bills. We did see some good news with a ruling in Connecticut in Andrea and Terry's case, actually, this week, where that case against them, the state there, was dismissed. But can you speak a little bit more about, in the states that are passing this anti-trans legislation, do you know how it's affecting trans kids? And Sarah, you can add a little bit more here at the end if you're so moved.
Absolutely. So trans sport policy is very confusing because it's incredibly patchwork. So I just want to say that up front, because we see states passing legislation where there might already be more progressive high school athletic association policies in place, and then the NCAA has a different policy. So there's a whole lot happening, which is also why it can be very confusing for any athlete who wants to play to navigate these policies. I think the main thing we're seeing, even in states where this legislation doesn't pass, is trans people, trans kids have to sit and watch legislators debate whether or not we exist, whether or not our identities are valid, whether or not we're going to be able to play sports with our friends, whether or not we can have access to medical care. And that takes a really serious mental and emotional toll when you're constantly being told by adults or people around you in the media that your identity and your life is not valid. And so I don't know that we know yet what the impacts of that will be long term. On the other side, I think we are seeing, and folks have spoken to this a little bit already, such an incredible groundswell of support from athletes, from celebrities, from coaches and communities that really are standing up and speaking out and saying, you don't speak for us, we support trans athletes, and we want trans people to be full and equal members in our society.
Sarah, what do you think? You were actually an advocate in the State House in the film, and so tell from your angle, like, how is it sort of dealing with this kind of stuff on a personal level?
So obviously I can't speak for every single trans person, how they're feeling, but I think it's from the outside looking in onto what's going on, like with legislative things and stuff. It's just so, I don't know, it's just mind boggling to see like that somebody could attack somebody's integrity and they're like personal self to such a deep level that it just like, it feels like your emotions and your self-being are ripped from you, because it's like, nobody should be judged or told they can or cannot do something because they're different. It's like, are we throwing ourselves back in time? Because that's what it feels like at this moment. Like, just like watching all of this like go down, and thank God in the Connecticut case that like got put down. But it's just like, to even think that that happened in the first place, for me, I'm just like, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Ann and Alex, you both work with the media on sports inclusion, and we've worked a lot together in the last couple months on this. So can we dig a little bit more into sort of the role of sports in our society and the media's role in shaping that narrative, and how some of what's happening can perpetuate harm for trans athletes?
Yeah, so I'll start with that. And thanks for the question, Jay. So obviously working at GLAAD, we are holding the media accountable and helping to tell more authentic and accurate stories about trans people. But we also have to know the history of this. So my other documentary, directed by Sam Fader, executive produced by Liver and Cox, called Disclosure, which is on Netflix, is about the history of trans representation in TV and film. And if you watch that film, you will see how trans people have been portrayed or misportrayed for the past 100 years. And if we look at the statistic that 80% of Americans say they don't personally know someone who's transgender, that means the majority, or everything most people know about who we are as people, has come from these misrepresentations and these gross projections about who we might be. And so when we're looking specifically at how the media has covered specifically trans inclusion in sport, we have seen that one singular narrative is the one that is continually propped up and propagated. You'll notice that no one seems to have a problem with trans athletes unless they're winning, unless they're doing well. And I think we need to be very thoughtful about that. I mean, what happened with the unwanted media attention lobbed onto Andrea and Terry in Connecticut because of the lawsuit that was pursued against them because they were winning some races, the media took that and used it as one singular narrative to exploit as justification for discriminating against and excluding trans youth across the country. That is, unfortunately, Andrea and Terry are the ones that all these state legislatures are pointing to as the reason why their states are introducing these bills. And so I think we just need to be media critical and look and hold the media to a higher standard of what stories are getting told and how and who is getting to tell them. And again, to so many of our points here, not getting away from the fact that so many of these stories are rooted in inherent sexism and racism. Who gets to be a girl? Who gets to be a woman? Who gets to win? And, you know, I'm so proud and feel so honored that Andrea and Terry trusted our filmmaking team enough to share their stories, because what has been done to their stories, I think, is criminal. They're young girls. They're young girls. And if you know the statistic, and I'm getting emotional because I don't know how they've been so graceful and how they've been so generous to do it in the face of so much hatred just for being Black trans girls who really like track and want to run with their friends. And so I'll let Anne speak a little more to that, but I get emotional because I hope the film shows that all of these young athletes are so brave and they are the heroes in their own stories. And yet they should not have to be this brave to be kids and to play sports.
I would love to just jump in.
Go for it. Go for it.
I would just love to jump in. And Alex, I feel your emotion. I feel similarly, not only because we live in Connecticut, but because we remember seeing those girls on the track when Gia was competing. And I just remember when the lawsuit was filed, the feelings that we had, the discussions that we had at home, the fear that what happened, as you say, that it became suddenly the scrutiny of all trans youth participating in sports, and it, our fears did not come to pass, and that Gia's teammates were still 100% behind her, and I'm sure at some point just forgot about the fact that she was transgender. But my heart was just so heavy for these girls. And then to watch in the film, and I'm so delighted that they did share their story, because we needed to hear from them. We were hearing all about them. And I think that's what this film points out so greatly, is that all these people who have opinions about kids, these are kids. Let us remember, these are children. And these are adults who are saying just the most horrendous of things. And you captured some of that on film, some of the horrible things that adults were showing out and saying. And so to listen to Ngozi, Andrea's mother, talk about her fear, but also her daughter's strength. And I think we really do have to focus on just how great these kids carry themselves. Sarah Rose, your strength, your bravery, your beauty, and smarts, that these kids are still just going out and living their lives despite being under such scrutiny from people who don't even know them.
Thank you, Lucina. And do you have more? What are your observations in this moment, especially when it comes to the media's role and what they could be doing better here?
Just want to thank both of you for that. And thank you for jumping in, because I definitely needed a second to compose myself. I think, I also just want to pick up on a few notes, which is, Alex, when you said that the poise of all of the athletes in the film who have been under such scrutiny and the tremendous pressure, I don't think people fully understand or can connect to what it is like to have the media constantly on you from all sides, and even well-intentioned media reporting in ways that can be really problematic. So I think the media definitely can do better in terms of providing more platforms in more ways for trans athletes to tell their own stories. I think we see, way too much of people being spoken about and not actually having the ability to tell their own stories. I think the other piece that needs to be highlighted even more is, and we're seeing more of this, but just the number of athletes, celebrities who have really been lending their voice to speak out on behalf of trans youth. We've seen Megan Rapinoe write an op-ed in the Washington Post. We've seen Billie Jean King, Candace Parker, Megan Rapinoe, again, over 250 female athletes sign on to an amicus brief in the case against HB 500 in Idaho. We've seen so many amazing avenues for support, and we need to be hearing about those more, not just about the negativity, the scrutiny, because the other pieces is trans folks we're thriving. People are living amazing, full lives, and we need to see those narratives as well, not just the pain and the trauma and the hurt, but just the beauty and the strength in everyday life.
And I want to just, I don't want to spoil alert for anyone who hasn't seen the film, but one of my favorite scenes of all time, and Sarah knows this, and like she might roll her eyes, I don't know, is when she is swinging her legs on the chairlift, because so often trans kids and any underrepresented communities, childhood, their innocence, their sense of wonder, their ability to go about the world and be free is taken away because we're worried so much about what the world is going to do to us. And yet we're still out there living our lives. And so that part makes me cry every single time, to what Anne and Lucina said. We have to see the strength. We have to see the joy. We have to see the humor that comes with this world is folly a lot of the time. And understanding that so much more connects us to what Sarah said. We all are different in so many ways, but we share more similarities. And let's hone in on that and understand that the issues we're facing right now with these legislative attacks against trans youth and trans athletes are very much intersectional issues. These are not just about trans youth. These are about how people are respected and seen and allowed to live in their lives. And the more free all of us are to do that, the better we will all be.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. I mean, I think one of the scenes in the film that really jumps out at me and Sarah is when you talk about, you know, almost feeling like you're holding back because you are afraid to win because of all of this nonsense around trans inclusion in sports. And you know, Alex, you're right. Like, it's just kids daring to do what you're supposed to do in sports and compete and win, right? And that's when it becomes a problem. But it creates an enormous amount of angst for kids who are just trying to do what kids should be able to do, and that's play sports with their friends. Lucina, I think as a mom, you know, you probably saw this on the sidelines as a spectator. So can you talk a little bit more about like how has this played out for your family and what your view of this as a spectator has been?
Yeah, that part in the film made me clutch as well, because you know, you do want your children to give their best, right? You know, to play hard and go for that win if you can. And I think that with Gia, she, you know, always put it out on the field. And I think what was incredible to see, especially during her 4 years of field hockey, because it is such a community, you know, it's like, I think 80 girls between the JV team, the freshman team, and the varsity. And to hear these other parents behind me and sitting beside me screaming my daughter's name as she's going for the goal was so awesome. You know, there's just nothing like it. And, you know, to get the emails, the constant emails about the pasta parties and, you know, preparing the lasagna and the baked ziti, so the girls could, you know, carb up before their games the next day. That was just awesome that, you know, Gia was, you know, such a part of that, riding the bus, you know, going to the banquets. That was our reality, right? And then, you know, the disconnect is everything that you read and hear and see that did not touch us, right? Nobody came to us and was like, let's have a discussion about this. That was never brought up. And I would say we live in a conservative town. And yet, because they know Gia, because they know our family, it's not about her being trans. It's about her being Gia, a teammate, a peer, a member of the community. And so she could experience the joys, the triumphs, and the disappointments, because honestly, their last game, right? They were headed for the championship, and somebody got COVID. And so they had to, I know they had to, default, and they didn't end up winning the championship, but it was okay. She got her 4 years in, she got her letter, she got her high honors student award, and she got her community, her family of field hockey teammates. That is our story.
Yeah. Alex, I saw you come off mute. Did you have something you wanted to say there too?
Yeah, I just wanted to say too, I mean, I think oftentimes sports gets boiled down to the winning and the losing. Mm-hmm. And, I played a lot of sports and I was competitive, but it was always for the fun of the game. Like I loved tennis. I love volleyball. I love golf. I love baseball. I love football. And I will say, when I was playing as a kid, it was so much just about being able to be out there on the field. And I think that's true for a lot of young kids. It's not always about even medaling. It's not about going to championships. It's not about going beyond being able to be on the field with your friends, chewing gum, maybe if you're playing baseball, and blowing bubbles. And so, I know there's a big conversation about sports. Right here, right now, we are talking about young kids wanting to play, and kids should get to play. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I can't imagine my life growing up without sports. It was essential to who I was and who I became. And I wasn't out as a trans kid then, but I certainly, I even know that I was questioned around my gender identity when I was playing, and these issues weren't even in the media then, because I was a tomboy. And I can imagine what this means for kids out there who are, gender expansive in their presentations. And it's unfair on so many levels. And I saw you just come off mute.
Yeah, because Lucina, every time I hear you speak, my heart just explodes, because I think we also need to be hearing more from parents and those journey stories too. And I just think, how lucky we are to be able to hear your perspective as a parent, and that you also work with, and do other work around trans inclusion with so many other parents that support their trans and gender expansive kids. And it gives me just so much hope, even in this very tough context. So thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to add thank you, and we'll all give each other a hug very soon. This is a very emotional panel. It's always very emotional. I was going to say also, and Sarah, I would love for you to talk about this as well. Sarah, Andre, and Mac have such supportive families. I mean, that is part of the reason that they are in the film. We wanted to show that reality, which is so often not shown. And to look at how much they had to go through, even with supportive families. So imagine if you do not have a supportive family or a supportive community. That's why we need to be loud about our support, about our allyship, about where we stand in supporting trans people and trans youth, because so many people, even though Sarah, Andrea, Terry, and Mac's journeys are not easy, they do have that support that I know so many don't. And so I want to take this opportunity to let people know out there, you do have support. We're just going to keep getting louder. And Sarah, I'd love for you to send a message out there as well.
I'll try my little message that I do every time. I just want everybody out there to know that you're loved and accepted no matter what's going on in your life right now. If times are hard right now, just know that it takes time to find that family, to find that group of people that love you and accept you for who you are. And just know that you will find it at the end regardless.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll cut a little clip of that, and folks can replay it whenever they need that. I really appreciate that. For anyone who wants to chime in, speaking of allyship, what does it mean to be an ally to trans people right now? I mean, at HRC, we just launched something at hrc.org/countmein, where folks can get a whole long list of ways they can stand in solidarity with us, trans and non-binary folks. But for others who want to chime in, what are your thoughts about what folks should take away from tonight's conversation and what they can do?
I can jump in. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, that was so beautiful, Sarah Rose. And I'm here with Mama Bear hugs if anybody needs one. I love Grandma Nancy. Oh my God. I want to talk to her, but I'm a little scared. You know, no, she'll
run right alongside you. Yeah.
Because
who doesn't love Grandma Nancy?
Yeah.
Who doesn't love her? But she represents, I think, a number of families who do support their children. They're going to go to the mat for them. You're not going to talk about my kids. But in terms of allyship, I love Count Me In. I think it's a beautiful thing. And because it gives people who say, oh, what can I do? I want to do something. Well, here, sign up here. Here's some things that we could use your help on. Certainly, reaching out to your reps is really important. But I really think we do need policy change. We need, the Equality Act passed, absolutely. But we also do need cultural change. And this is where the films like Changing the Game are so important, because it does reach the hearts and minds. And so I think it's an opportunity for those 80% of people who say they don't know anybody. Now you do. Okay, now you've heard a story. Now you've heard us talk. So the next time, you are involved in a conversation about this issue, you can say, well, actually, that's not what I heard, or that's not the experience that I just had. And try to have a different conversation, because we need one conversation at a time. That's sometimes what it's going to take to really change the narrative.
And I said, yeah.
Yeah, I'm emotional and slow with the unmute button right now. I also totally agree that one-to-one conversations is a massive part of what is going to shift the narrative nationally. If you hear someone say something, have a conversation, try to correct them if they use language that's not inclusive or language that is targeting trans youth. It's just so important that we know that each of us in our communities has such tremendous power to create change and to change hearts and minds just by taking the time to have a conversation. Also, we know that Changing the Game is coming to Hulu June 1st. Watch it again. Tell everyone you know to watch it. Play it in your house every day. That's what I plan to do. Just keep those views up. And have conversations with folks about the film, with what moved you. I hope that this conversation will live somewhere after we have it, so that people can maybe watch it later after they see the film on Hulu. So definitely watch the film. Next, please follow Athlete Ally on all of the social media channels at Athlete Ally. We have a lot of action alerts. Also follow Chris Mosier at the Chris Mosier, who puts up an action alert a day, very easy, concrete steps. And also, if anybody here tonight is in Florida, knows folks in Florida. I have asked Shane with Changing the Game to post an action alert from Equality Florida in the chat. Anybody you know in Florida, please send it. Please send it to them. We are trying to get the governor to veto the anti-trans sports ban. So those are just a few things from me. Thank you.
I'm gonna go next, and then I'm gonna put it back to the star of this panel. Like, I went on a journey with this film, and I have grown as a trans person. I have evolved my thinking. I have become better because I have gotten uncomfortable with what I thought to be true. I would encourage every single person to not stop interrogating why you think and feel the way you do about certain things. Stay open. And if you have the privilege and the position to have these conversations, please do, because we are all going on a journey, and it's not A to B, it's A to, I don't know, B. So I hope that people, when you watch the film, you see that these people who love these amazing young people went on their own journeys. And sometimes it took a while, and there were missteps, and there were mishaps, and there were stumblings. But Grandma Nancy says, you don't have to get it. You just have to go with it. So I would encourage all of you, you don't have to get it, go with it, and continue becoming. I think that's the richness of life, and we should all be getting uncomfortable in order to do better and make the world better. So I will move it back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Sarah, I think I'm going to put the last question to you. So we've all seen the film, or everybody who hasn't has hopefully been evangelized to watch it and to evangelize it to others. So what do you hope people do with their families, on their teams and their communities at the statewide level now that they've seen the film and met you?
Yeah. I really just hope people get out there and tell people about changing the game, obviously, but most importantly, reminding people that trans people are humans and that we are here on this planet to just be here, and we are amazing, and we love everybody for who they are, because we've had so much adversary on us, and all we want to do is give happiness and love and life to you guys, because it's like we go through so much in our lifetimes, and we never want to see anybody go through that hardship that we go through. So really just get out there, go and speak your truth, go tell your story if you have a story. Yeah, use social media, be upfront with it, talk to your grandma, your grandpa, your nana, your papa, anybody. Just go have a conversation with somebody and just let them know about, I guess, just like what's going on in life, like with trans news and just LGBTQ news, I guess.
Thank you, Sarah. And Lucina, I'm going to give you credit for using the right metaphor with going to the mat earlier. I think there are so many sports metaphors that are swirling around in folks' heads right now, but I want to just say every single person who's here and who's watching can be part of the team and in making this a different reality for folks. So I want to thank all the panelists for joining us tonight. This was super emotional, but really powerful, and I really appreciated all of you all coming together. Thank you, Sarah, Lucina, Alex, and Anne, for your leadership, your insights. And again, I'm going to plug the film Changing the Game. It's making its streaming premiere on June 1st on Hulu as a Hulu original documentary and part of Hulu's Pride Month celebration. So watch it, and watch it with your friends and get others to watch it too. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, HRC. Thanks, everybody. Great seeing you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.